I need to get new glasses because these ones are so crooked. Every time that I watch a video of us, I'm like, oh my God, my eye's crooked? Is my nose crooked?
Yeah, I think the same thing.
About my face being crooked.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Maddie,
And I'm Abigail, and this is
two writers.
Many Wrongs. Today we have Claire Lombardo, who is an author of the nationally best-selling novel Same as It Ever Was. Her debut, The Most Fun We've Ever Had, was an instant New York Times bestseller, and it was a Reese's book club pick, which I definitely want to get into. Claire graduated from the University of Illinois Chicago and the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her short fiction has appeared in Playboy, Barrel House Magazine, Little Fiction, and Long Form, among others. Prior to publishing The Most Fun We Ever Had, Claire spent several years working with homeless children and families in Chicago. She has taught fiction writing at the Iowa Writers Workshop and Grinnell College and worked as a bookseller at Prairie Light Books. Thank you so much for being here, Claire. I kind of want to start off by asking, so you are only the second author that has ever, like, I've just sent an email in the hopes, been like, hey, I'm a huge fan. Would you come talk to us? You're
Yeah.
only the second one who's ever said yes. What,
Oh,
what inspired you to like come on our little podcast?
I feel like so many of the things that have helped me in my career have been other people taking time to talk to me or to give me advice or to sort of work through things. And so I always like talking to other writers. I like talking to other writers who are trying to help other writers,
Yeah. hmm
themselves. And I'm a teacher also, not full time, but I love talking about writing. I love talking about craft. So I'm always happy for an opportunity to do that. So
Oh,
yeah,
that's
thank
so
you guys
nice.
for doing what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm super excited about it because I don't know if your agent showed you my initial email or not, but I use your books for comp titles as I'm querying
Oh,
agents right
cool.
now.
Okay.
And so, like, learning about your publishing journey is really, really interesting to me because I also write like family-centric, literary fiction kind of stuff. So,
Mhm.
how did that journey start with like your querying and finding the right agent and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. My story is very unromantic, I have to tell you. I love the stories that are like I queried 100 people and all of them said no, and then the 101st, it was this kismetic
hmm
moment. I met my agent when I was in graduate school, which I realize I am very fortunate to have done. But my graduate program had agents, three or four agents come through a year, and I knew nothing about the industry. I knew nothing about publishing. I was writing the book that became the most fun we ever had with no conception that anyone was ever going to read it. And then I was in graduate school and I wasn't workshopping my novel. I was just writing stories, but I had a professor who said, just go meet with the agents. You'll be glad you did in a few years. And so I did, and I sort of got good. Well, I didn't get good at it. I still am not good at it, but at sort of that, pitching your book to
hmm
someone. Because I think most of us, when we're writing a first book, a second book, maybe even a third book, you don't really know how to talk about it to other people. So that was good practice for me to kind of be able to say, here's why you should, take my pages and read them. But when I met my agent, I was very nervous. And I basically was like, I wrote this book. It doesn't really have a plot. It's like 900 pages long. For whatever reason, my lovely agent was like, I love long books. Talk to me more about other
Yeah.
writers you like. And
Oh.
yeah, I was very fortunate to find her. And then I continued meeting with agents because I wasn't quite done with my book. So I think it was helpful for me to talk to a variety of different people. I think what did I had a professor who once said you want your agent to be mean to everyone and nice to you, and you want your editor to be nice. No. mean to you and nice to everyone else.
I love that you met with so many different people because like for us, our graduate program really, I think we had an agent come and talk to us like once
Okay.
ever.
Mhm.
It was much more just like focused on the writing aspect of it, not so much on the publishing aspect of it. And so I think it's really cool that you had the opportunity to sit down and talk to people because I feel
Yeah.
like if I could get in the room with somebody, I could convince them to publish my book,
Right.
but the query letter is so hard.
No, it's so hard and it's so even if you make it personal, it's
Hmm.
impersonal because everyone's getting a million emails a day, even if they're not
Yeah.
an agent.
Hmm.
And it's very hard to make your book sound different than someone else's.
Hmm.
Unless, like you said, you are able to kind of bring yourself to it personally,
Right.
ideally face to face. So I think it is it's a really challenging process, and I don't have a great deal of advice, and I try to sort of distance myself from the industry as much as I can. But one thing I tell my students, about writing, but also about pitching your work is talk about it the way that is meaningful to you. Don't
Hmm.
try to package it as, what you think is selling now or what you think will kind of be attractive based on how the market is, because the market is changing
Hmm.
constantly. And so I think if you're able to, I like writing about people who are pretty ordinary. And
Hmm.
I try to come by that honestly instead of which I have fallen prey to with both of my books and with a new project that I'm working on. It's like, how do you package this in like a sexy little package with,
Hmm.
two sentences that make it sound like it's going to be the next A, B, or C. But I think it ends up being more compelling if you can talk about it in an
Hmm.
excited way. And same goes for writing. I particularly my younger students, I think they feel like I need to write about these sort of big capital
Hmm.
I ideas or capital T topics. And you don't. You don't. Any story can be compelling if it's the story that you're interested in telling. So
Hmm.
that's a
Yeah, I
little,
think
yeah.
because
Yeah.
when you were talking about when you were speaking to your agent that you're like, I don't know, it's about people, it's like 900 pages. But there was something that came through of you being really excited and passionate about this project that
Mhm.
must have roped her in. And I think that's key is showing that like not only this isn't just a project I'm working on, this is a project I'm super passionate about. And I you can
Hmm.
feel that energy coming off of someone and
Absolutely.
hopefully in their query letter as well.
Yeah.
I know it's harder to do when you can't just like gush to some.
Right. No, it's so funny because so in our graduate program I had to have a second reader for my thesis, which was my or is my first novel. And so I was talking to her about it and she's like, "Well, what do you like to write about?" And I was like, "I don't know, like boring fiction. Like it's not sci-fi, it's not romance, it's not whatever." And she goes, "Sweetie, that's called literary fiction." And I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, that sounds way better than what I've been
Right.
saying." Because again, it's exactly like you. It's very character centric. There's not a lot of heavy plot going on. But I mean, I think that's why I connect with your book so much is because you're so compassionate to all of your characters, even though they're all, kind of flawed and doing crazy stuff. But it's one of those things where like I love books just about people.
Mhm.
And I think that that is so underrated in this industry. It's so hard to publish that. But I mean, the most fun we've ever had. I mean, it was a New York Times bestseller. Like, how do you handle that kind of hype? And it's a freaking Reese's book club pick. Like, what on earth?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That was a weird turn of events.
Like, how do you follow that kind of hype?
I don't know. It was very unexpected to me. I mean, like I said, my first novel was like I never expected it to be published, let alone have commercial success. And it was such a joy to write because I had zero agenda and zero expectation.
Mm.
I wrote most of it before I even went to grad school, so I was just having fun and
Mhm.
trying different things. And it was just sort of the thing that was mine that almost no one had read. And so to have it find the editor that it did and the publishing house that it did, and then have all of these people who were like, we're gonna put a lot of muscle behind this book was incredible. And such a gift. And I do feel like I need to stress that I am lucky. I also
Mhm.
work super fucking hard, but so do a lot
Mhm.
of people, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
it doesn't always come together in that way. So I think the way that sort of big books are made is a combination of someone working really hard on something that they're proud of, but also a lot of other stars aligning. So I'm very cognizant of that. I think as a woman especially, it's important for us to take ownership of the work that we do. And I am a hard worker and I always have been. But I also have, a ton of people who put force behind both of my books now. And so I feel very fortunate for that. But yeah, with Most Fun, it was just sort of crazy to have these characters that I had just been spending years alone with, and suddenly people are, rooting for them or they hate them or they.
Yeah.
My mom and I got into because I read the book and I was like, "Mom, you have to read this fucking book." And like we got into a fight over this book because I was like, "I love Wendy and I hate Violet." And my mom was like, "Are you kidding me? Violet's been through everything. Wendy's the worst." I'm like, "I can't have this conversation with you right now."
Yeah, yeah.
But it's always funny. Like these characters really get under your skin in a very intense
Hmm.
way. And then with Same as It Ever Was, my mom went through like relatively severe postpartum with both my brother and I,
Mhm.
and so it was a really great insight for me reading the book to kind of get a deeper understanding of what she went through. And you talk about motherhood in both of your books in this really kind way and like talk about these issues of postpartum and motherhood and all that kind of stuff. Where does that inspiration come from? Like, what compels you to write these kinds of books?
I don't really have a good answer to that question. It's a good question. I think both of my books started with character for me. And I think just within the sort of demographics and ages of the characters I was writing about, these are things that come up. The choice to become a mother or not become a mother, or it's not always a choice, etc. It felt relevant, and it's something that, is relevant in my own life, and in the conversations I have with my friends and my sisters and stuff. But I think it's funny. I get that question a lot about Same as It Ever Was in particular. Um, and that book for me, it felt more that I describe Same as It Ever Was again, which is why my publisher hates for me to talk about my books. It's about a woman's life, like a completely
Mm-hmm.
unremarkable woman, start to finish. And part of that is the sort of, do I have kids or not? And then when I do, should I have had kids or not? And I find them interesting. These are the kind of like big questions that a lot of us face or avoid having to face. So they were of interest to me. And
Yeah.
I think it's just really, parental relationships are such fruitful terrain to just
Yes.
the gift that keeps on giving, really,
Yep. Yep.
for a fiction writer and as just as a human.
Mm-hmm.
So I think dwelling in that space made sense. And once you're there, you just sort of keep finding doors to open.
Yeah. Well, I love in Same as It Ever Was that she's terrified of her daughter,
Mm.
because my mom and I have had those exact same discussions where she's like, "You were terrifying as a teenager."
Uh-huh. I was
Like,
the worst. I know.
oh my God. And now I have a daughter who's 1, and I'm like, "Oh, just stay this
Yeah.
sweet forever. Please don't turn it like I
Day
don't want to be
one.
afraid of you."
Right. Yeah.
No, I love that, and it's such an inspiration to see your books have such commercial success, but also to touch readers so deeply. Because, again, like I said, as somebody who writes similar fiction to that, I often find myself thinking like, is there an audience for this? I had an agent recently tell me like, oh, I wouldn't market this as literary fiction or contemporary fiction. Like, it's really more women's fiction. Do you get like how do they market your writing?
Um, well, my publisher markets my writing as
Mhm.
contemporary or literary fiction.
Hmm.
Often libraries or just sort of the zeitgeist. You do,
Mhm.
if you're a woman writing about women, you get put into the bucket of women's fiction, which I hate.
Yeah.
Hate.
There's no
Yeah.
men's fiction, and
Right.
most fiction is about women. I mean, it's
Mhm.
just it strikes me as really odd, and I find it annoying. But I was very lucky to find a publisher who just took my work at face value and treated it
Mhm.
the same way that they would treat, a man writing domestic fiction.
Right.
Cool. Weird.
Um, yeah, I know.
Amazing.
A novel
What a
concept.
concept. Right. But I think it is a mixed bag. I think
Mhm.
with Same as It Ever Was, I found in review coverage and stuff, I think it felt less um maybe because I'm a little older. I don't exactly know why, but it felt a little bit less like here's
Mhm.
this girl writing about girls,
Mhm.
and a little more like here's a novelist writing a novel.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I do think it's problematic, and I think it's hard to, it's also most books fall into multiple categories, so it's hard to
Hmm.
kind of say I'm writing a literary novel or I'm writing,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's just part of our culture is, let's
Mhm.
slap a label on something and
Yeah.
proceed that way when in fact most things are murky or on a spectrum or,
Yeah.
in some kind of,
Multifaceted.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
I I recently had this author that I was looking for their book and I couldn't find it, and it was because they had shelved it in a different location at this bookstore than they had shelved it at a different bookstore I was
Yeah.
at. So, it just shows that there's kind of a cross there that it could be this or it could be
Hmm.
that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, again, it's really nice seeing your books have so much success and it gives me hope. But I do want to go back a little bit and talk about, you're talking about that aspect of luck there.
Yeah.
And obviously, that is a huge component to getting into this industry. But you also were a part of one of the most prestigious writing programs of the Iowa Writers Workshop. How did you get into that program? Like, what was that process like? Because that's an insane amount of hard work to get in. Talk about that.
Yeah, I don't really have an answer to that either. So I was in graduate school to become a therapist. I was getting my master's in
Huh.
social work. But like the week that I arrived, I also started writing a novel.
Mhm.
Um, and that very quickly it became clear to me like that's what I would like to
Mhm.
be doing. So I dropped out of graduate school after a year and I said I will give myself a year to work on this book and apply to MFA programs, and if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, I have this half degree waiting for me that I can
Mhm.
go back and finish. So I had a very small savings account. I think it was about $600 that I cashed out and used to, if you've been apply to MFA programs, which is
Mhm.
ludicrously expensive, as you
Yes.
know. So I think I applied to 11 or 12, and Iowa was just sort of like as long as I'm doing this, I might as well, pay the 50
Mhm.
bucks and throw it in because, you know, why not? And I could not believe that I got in. I mean, it was very because I had not studied creative writing.
Mhm.
I my undergraduate education was pretty cobbled together. I dropped out of college in addition to dropping out of grad
Mhm.
school. And I worked in social services for most of my 20s, without a college degree. So I didn't sort of have the academic pedigree that I assumed
Mhm.
that I don't believe in for the record.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I got there and it was truly the most I mean, both of you will understand this. Like the most
Mhm.
wonderful gift you can give a writer is here's enough money to pay your rent, and all you have to do is
Oh,
write
yeah.
and read. And that was,
Yes.
yeah, the first time I had ever not had some weird job that wasn't paying me enough. And
Hmm.
Right.
um, so I suddenly just had, half of this really cute little house, and um, all I had to do was write and talk about writing. And so I really took advantage. I still think of my graduate school years as some of the most wonderful of my
Hmm.
creative life.
Hmm.
Because I just took all the classes that I physically could and
Yeah.
and just wrote as much as I could. And I came to graduate school with a draft of the book that became the most fun we ever had. And I just put it in a drawer for a year and wrote stories because I wanted to, you know,
Hmm.
you have again a great gift of all these people who it's their job to read your fiction. Like no
Yeah.
one will ever give you as much attention as your workshop classmates and your professors, ideally. So I just tried to, write bad stories, write whatever, and then learn from learn
Hmm.
from that. So yeah, it was an incredible few years of my life. Yeah.
That's so cool.
That's so
Like
cool. Yeah.
it really is. It's one of those programs that like my family knows very little about writing, but like they know what the Iowa
Right.
Writers Workshop is, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Um,
bizarre. It's a strange. I mean, it's been around
hmm.
forever. I think that's the
Yeah.
primary. It's got that.
Hmm.
And everyone's heard of, Vonnegut or even if
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was writing about it recently and I described it as like the writing program that your grandmother's cousin's neighbor probably started off.
Yes, that
It
is
is that
exactly
sort
what
of
it is.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that.
Did did you also like study pedagogy and like the teaching side of things, or was it really just focused on the writing?
So I had a fellowship that my first year I didn't have to teach, and my second year I did. And there wasn't really any, I shouldn't say that, there wasn't a great deal of preparation. It was just sort
Hmm.
of like, here's your class, good luck,
Hmm.
26
Yeah.
year old. But I loved it. I had so much fun teaching, and I was really fortunate to have friends who had,
Hmm.
taught and were generous with their, different materials or just advice. So I taught undergrads my second year, and then I had a third year teaching fellowship. And now I teach grad students. So yeah, it's the thing that's interesting about creative writing as sort of an academic field, I think, is that I mean, there's of the debate of, can it be taught or not?
Right.
Hmm.
I'm not really sure. I think she says as a as a creative writing professor, I don't know. I think
Hmm.
the great benefit of fiction workshops, I think, is just that kind of collaborative
Yeah.
conversation. And oftentimes, I don't know how to solve the problems of my students' fiction, or I'll hear myself giving advice and realize, like, oh, I'm talking about chapter 17 of my own book or what.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that is what's cool. There's not, a workshop leader, ideally, I don't walk into the classroom with any conception that I know more than my students.
Hmm.
Mm.
It's more about giving the conversation structure and I guess helping each piece become
Hmm.
whatever it is the writer is trying to make it. But yeah, I love teaching. I don't teach full time, and I don't know that I could, but
Hmm.
I like having the two things hand in hand. I think it helps me when I'm writing to be teaching at the same time. So, do either of you teach?
I do. I'm an adjunct professor, and so I was at the University of North Florida for a while, and it was great because they gave me creative writing classes in addition to like beginning English courses.
Yeah.
And now I'm at Rollins in Winter Park in Florida, um, but they don't have any creative writing openings right now, so
Oh,
I'm just teaching those beginning English classes, which I still enjoy. I love being in the classroom. I
mhm.
love especially the beginning English classes, I get so many kids who are like, I suck at writing or I don't like writing, and kind
Yeah.
of being like, no, you just don't know how. Like, we're going to practice.
Yeah.
But I miss creative writing classes because just like you said, like, it really is, editing their work helps me be a better editor for my work.
Yeah.
And it's so funny that you talk about workshops because Maddie and I have had a debate about workshops and how beneficial they can be if you have a good moderator,
Hmm.
and how just devastating they can be when you don't have a good moderator.
Hmm.
What was it? It was in grad school, wasn't it, Maddie? That like basically your entire workshop just
Hmm.
hammered you, and
Hmm.
like how mad I
Yeah.
was at that teacher for not stepping in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
Um,
I
yeah.
really liked what you were talking about though when you were talking about how you approach your fiction classes about you're coming in there to as like kind of a conversation and we kind of talked about whether you can teach writing, but I think that we often use the word mentor when we're talking about like in our fiction
Yeah.
classes, and I really feel like that fits it a lot better. Is like you're mentoring, not so much teaching. It's like there's a skill and you're trying to help them figure out how to shape the
Hmm.
clay that they already are trying to see. And I think that was a really good metaphor. But I do think that as a mentor, you have to mentor people on how to properly give critique
Yes.
that's not tearing
Yes.
down the author.
Hmm.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have had a few workshops like that as a student where it's like,
Hmm.
could somebody help me out here? But
Right? Can someone step in?
yeah.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
try to, my approach in the last few years has been very praise based.
Hmm.
And the thing I tell my students is like, you can't fix what's not working until you know
Hmm.
what is working. So I always lead with like, let's talk about the strengths of this piece, what is working really well and what, doesn't need to be fixed. And that I find generally helps.
Hmm.
There's always one in a
Of course.
workshop group.
Yes. There's always somebody
Some
who wants to be the next Hemingway, and you're like,
Yes,
dude, take it
yes.
down a notch.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
It's not an effective approach.
Hmm.
No.
Yeah.
So yeah, I try to
Yeah.
keep it humane
Yeah.
where possible.
No, I completely agree on that. And I think that's the thing that I miss about teaching creative writing classes,
Hmm.
is just that energy of like, hey, just because you don't understand something or doesn't mean it's bad. Like just because it's not written for
Yeah,
you doesn't. And I really feel like I've opened students up to like, oh, it's just not for me. Like it's not bad. It like
yeah,
there are really good things about it that I could even recognize. It's just not my taste of things. And I feel like that's one of the most important things to me when dealing with students is like you don't have to like everything and you're not gonna like everything, but you should be able to like respect it and point out the good things about it,
yeah.
which is hard sometimes.
It is. I struggled a lot. Will get in trouble for this, but as a TA when I was in my mid-20s, I had a no wizards clause in my syllabus because I didn't know how to read magical fiction and
Mm,
it made
Hmm.
me nervous
hmm.
and I didn't
Yeah.
and I know also when you have a room full of 18-year-olds it might just devolve into like, well, if the
Hmm.
door only opens at midnight, how did she get through?
Right.
There's all of these, which I love about fantasy fiction, is that
Hmm.
you're not just writing a book, you're creating a world. I find it,
Hmm.
I could never do that myself. So I used to have a no wizards clause, and then I had a no novel excerpts clause. But now I let them submit whatever they want, and I approach fiction in a very sort of mechanical way.
Hmm.
So I don't care if you're writing fantasy, if you're doing retellings of fairy tales, if you're writing crime fiction, if you're writing literary fiction, whatever,
Hmm.
we're going to look at your sentences. We're going to sort of like open the
Hmm.
hood and look at, because fiction does have the sort of basic
Hmm.
mechanics
Right.
that you can talk about even if you don't read fantasy or you don't read
Hmm.
romance or you don't read literary or you don't read, whatever.
Hmm.
And I think that's
Hmm.
kind of an important skill to as a writer, but also as, as an editor, as a teacher, to be able to sort of code switch and say, here's how I talk about romance novels, here's how I talk about whatever.
Right.
Found that helpful, and it's helped me as someone who doesn't read super broadly to
Hmm. Yeah.
meet
Yeah.
my students' work where it's at.
Well, I love that you're taking ownership of that because so Maddie writes sci-fi and has had teachers in the past be like, genre of fiction isn't
Yeah,
real fiction." And it's just one of those things where it's like, no, you just don't know how to read it. So I
yeah,
love that you're taking ownership of that for your students of like, you guys are valid. I don't know how to do this.
yes.
And then you found a way to freaking do that. Like that's so admirable as a teacher.
Like I'm not, especially lately, I'm not a super prolific reader of anything. But when you are teaching fiction, your students are going to be, ideally they're
Right.
going to be readers. And who is reading, more of anything than fantasy, than sci-fi? I mean, it's huge right now. And so I,
Right.
I, I love seeing my students get excited about something just because it's something that it's not that I'm not excited about it. I'm just not great reader lately, but
Yeah.
so I like to meet them, where
Mhm.
they're coming from. And yeah.
I think for me, some of the best workshops I've ever had is where people set aside the fact that it was sci-fi
Yes.
Mhm.
and they just looked at my characters and they looked at the plot and how then they weren't like concerned like yes because I write my stories have people in them even though they've got tentacles and they're weird but
Right.
essentially I want to know are these characters' relationships does this make sense this relationship they have with their mother and does this plot
Yeah.
progression make sense of the self-discovery they've had so I think for me I prefer when you just kind of just forget that they're aliens and forget that we're in a weird world. I just want to know at the core of this story, is it working?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
On your website's profile, it talks about that you were a bookseller for a long time.
Yeah.
I worked at Barnes and Noble for about 10 years, and then I
Cool.
worked for an independent bookstore for about 2 years. And I only left like not that long ago, but I really miss being a bookseller. Do you ever
Yeah.
miss being on the floor?
Yeah.
Like,
I do. I do. I came to bookselling. What bookstore did you work at? What indie?
um, so the independent bookstore that I worked at was the Writer's Block bookstore on Park Ave.
Oh, cool.
Um,
Okay. I've
Yeah,
not been.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's cute. There are a lot of really good independent bookstores in Orlando, which is nice.
Yeah.
But it was a very different vibe from being at Barnes and Noble, and I left Barnes and Noble kind of at the height of its like corporate restructuring.
Okay.
I've heard that now it's much more like bookseller forward. That it's changed a lot. But I miss like getting arcs and,
Yeah.
getting really excited and talking to people about, right? Like my favorite day in a bookstore was when somebody would come in and be like, "Hey, these are the last three books I read. Recommend something to me."
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
would go crazy with that.
Yeah. No, it's such a like joyful environment. So I worked at Prairie Lights in Iowa City, and I actually didn't start working there until it was like 2022.
Mm,
I had already published my first book, and I spent a lot of time at Prairie Lights, but not as an employee. And they had been very supportive of the most fun we ever had. But it was sort of that like post-COVID time where people were
mm,
still not totally comfortable. And we stayed masked at Prairie Lights until
mm,
recently. But it was like I had just been alone in my house for like 2 years with my dog writing a
Hmm.
novel and not talking to people. And I wandered into the bookstore one day and was talking to my friend Kathleen, and it was the holidays were coming up, and she was like, we're getting slammed. You don't know anyone who wants to work in a bookstore, do you? And I was like, in fact, I might. So I worked there just a couple afternoons a week, but it was such a lovely way to kind of reintroduce myself to the
mhm,
world,
Hmm.
having been sort of out of it for a couple years. And yeah, like you said, we just the ARC room and
yes.
just the people are generally too, like customers and bookstores are generally pleasant people. Like everyone's
Hmm.
there for a common cause. So even when it was like
Hmm.
really crazy around the holidays, nobody was being an asshole. It was a very
Hmm.
nice environment to work, and it helped me get to know my community that I had sort of
Hmm.
lost touch with during the pandemic.
Hmm.
And Iowa City is as any city, but it's a great sort of eclectic mix of academics and sort of lifelong residents of the city, and just people who, there's tons of writers and tons of
Hmm.
teachers and just interesting people. So
Yeah.
always things to talk about, and I do miss it often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny to me because working at Barnes and Noble, you would get people who would come in there for very specific things, or like parents who are like, "Hey, my kid has to do summer reading. What's the shortest book that you can sell me that's grade level appropriate?" And it's like, well,
Sure.
your kid's. Versus working at an independent bookstore, people were there because they loved reading and like they
Yeah.
wanted to find their next book, and it like that part I miss about it. And again, in the process of querying my own book, like I could find the best comp titles because I was getting access to the new books that were coming out.
Hmm.
And so there's so much about bookselling that I miss, but I also feel like there is kind of the immediate camaraderie of it's like, oh, you used to be a bookseller, so you know how crazy people can be when it comes to
Yes,
books. Like
absolutely.
it's a very niche demographic of people, I
It
feel
is.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I do miss it as much as people are insane, you know.
Yes, yes, because they're insane everywhere, so you might as well be in
That's
a
true.
bookstore.
Yes,
Might as
Yeah.
well be in a
exactly.
bookstore. I love that.
Yeah.
Right, exactly, exactly. Um, okay, so I want to jump a little bit. We've talked about, some of your publishing journey. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of like your writing journey in itself.
Sure.
So you talked about like working on short fiction. You had the novel written, kind of put it away, and then started publishing. But you've published, I mean, in some really like interesting places. I mean, I love that your website lists like Playboy and Barrel House as
Mm.
like the first two,
Yeah.
which is just really fun. Like, what did you enjoy about writing that short fiction? What inspired you to kind of get into that sphere and put your novel to the side?
I love short stories. I love short
Yay.
stories more than novels. I think they're harder to write than novels,
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
because I think a good short story should be accomplishing everything that a novel is accomplishing, just in, a
Mm-hmm.
20th of the space or more than that if you're me, I guess, and your novel is really long. But
Mm-hmm.
so I loved them as well, first of all, I think I didn't, even when I had written a novel, I don't think I had the confidence at the time to say that I had written a novel because it
Hmm.
feels like sort of you have to have some degree of ego to write
Yeah.
a novel and to claim that you've written a novel. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah.
sort of this, you know, I have something that's worth a story that's worth telling, or I have
Hmm.
written something that is worthy of your time. So you have to have a little bit of an ego. But all writers that I have ever met are also deeply insecure in some capacity, some
Mm-hmm.
not as much
Yes.
as they should be, maybe. Um, but for me, I think it was embarrassing or just sort of
Mm-hmm.
scary to say that I had written a novel. And I also find it harder to workshop novel excerpts.
Mm-hmm.
So I just started writing stories in graduate school. And I miss it. I mean, I've tried doing it again. I think I'm just sort of out of in a strange space sort of after you publish a book, but my same as it ever was actually began as stories.
Hmm.
And I wanted to publish a story collection and it's just
So much harder.
yeah, it's a hard sell.
Yeah.
But I think it made it a lot harder to create that novel because I had all these disparate pieces, but I think it also made me better acquainted with the characters and the world because I was sort of working on I wrote stories from, perspectives of different characters and same as it
Mm-hmm.
ever was. And I explored different periods of Julia's life and Julia's marriage and so I think it benefited me ultimately. It was
Mm-hmm.
horrible when I had, a pile of stories to sort of
Hmm.
deal
Mm-hmm.
with. But yeah, I love short fiction. I love reading short fiction. I think it is a shame and really kind of shocking in the world that we live in where nobody has an attention span, self included. Why
Mm-hmm.
isn't it more popular?
I
Because
don't
when,
understand that either.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like one of the big things I would get, or I get just in my life when people are asking for something to read, they want something that's, I can read a
Mm-hmm.
chapter and fall asleep, which is what I do.
Right.
So you could read it twice. I just don't understand it, but yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah, it really is.
Mm-hmm.
I really love short stories. I did the same thing when I was in grad school because I was like, again, I'm writing like this a space opera, so it's like it's large, it's expanding. I'm like, this is not
Yeah.
going to work in a workshop
Mm-hmm.
environment. So I was taking
Uh-huh.
like smaller pieces to kind of practice like what the bigger novel was going to be, but on a smaller scale. And again,
Yeah.
I do feel like that's a lot harder to like contain this growth of a character from beginning to end in such a small amount of space. So I felt like if I can get a short story right, I may have a shot at finishing this novel.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, totally.
hmm So you were talking about like the different points of view, and that's one of the things that I like about the most fun we've ever had is there's so many different points of view, and there's different times going on, and we jump back and forth in the future, in the past, and whatever. And you also do the same thing, the same as it ever was. But what is the hardest part for you? Because Maddie and I, both of our books are multi POV. And both of us kind of struggle with that sometimes. So, do you have any advice on how to write multi POV?
So I've actually been storyboarding for a long time.
Hmm.
But when I was writing Most Fun, my mentor, to use that word again, in grad school was very generously reading my Most Fun. Like most thesis advisors would read like 100 pages. He read
hmm
890 or something.
Oh,
So he and I would, over the course of a year, we would meet like once a month, and he would have read, 100 more pages or whatever. And then when I finally finished, he brought me, it's called extruded polystyrene. It's that purple foam stuff that uh my boards are on. And he said, now you're ready to edit your novel. And so I mapped it out. Because it is unwieldy when you've got different
hmm
characters, different timelines, different places, different storylines. So I find that really helpful. It's a way to sort of concretize something that, you can't hold a novel in your head. You especially can't hold a long novel
no.
that spans, yeah, lots of time and space and universes and whatever. So I found it a really helpful way to just sort of, you can look at it and say, God, there's a lot of red post-its up in that corner. Like maybe I should spread those out. And
Do you break it down by timeline or by character perspective, or like how do you break that up?
I've done it every which way. For Most Fun, especially, I sort of kept redoing it. I did a version that was a color per character.
Mm-hmm.
I did a version that was a color per plot line. So like the romance plot, the heist plot, and I'm generalizing, but
No, but yeah,
Right.
I would like to write a heist novel. That
That'd
sounds
be
more
that'd be
fun.
than
cool.
what I'm doing. And then what else did I do? For Most Fun, I guess too, because I'm looking at it because I do not remember this book that I wrote.
Listen, I
Um,
get that.
by timeline, I guess, yeah, like the white post-its are the
Mhm.
past arc of the parents meeting each other, whatever. So it's kind of whatever makes the most sense. And same as it ever was, I did something similar, and I, ended up being sort of, here are the three chunks of
Mm-hmm.
Julie's life. And within those chunks, here are the colors for the friendship plot and the affair
Mm-hmm.
plot and the whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really helpful with Same as It Ever Was in particular because my editor is in New York. I was in Iowa City at the time. And so we would just be on Zoom and I would have my board behind me and just kind of do the Vanna White, like, what about here? And Lee, my editor, was able to say, like, this is wild, but like, what if we move this point from chapter 2 to chapter 27? Like, how does that
Mm-hmm.
change the book? And it's really fun. That's more fun than writing to me. Because it means you have written, but it's like doing a jigsaw puzzle or something. It's kind of figuring out how the story
Yeah,
fits best together.
You and Maddie both love that. It drives me
do.
Yeah.
crazy.
I love that.
She could
I
spend all day.
Yeah,
I
me too.
I also had a board where I had post-it notes and I loved the physicality of being able to move this plot point
Yes,
over here. It makes more sense in my brain because I
me
can't again like
too.
it can't fit it all in my brain. I needed to throw it out on the wall. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a way to like stop looking at your computer and sort of get out of
Hmm.
your own head.
hmm
I love it. I'm excited to start a new one whenever
Yeah.
I write something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, when you're writing books like this, do you write them or try to plot them linearly, or do you just kind of write like the next thing that you know happens?
Neither. I write completely chaotically. And like Most Fun, I wrote what I wanted when I wanted. And some days it was like, I think I'm gonna send the parents to the grocery store today. Like I don't, I'm gonna get
hmm
these two people in a fight today. I'm gonna
hmm
um and it made it harder to put together at the end. And so I sort of swore that for my second book I would be more linear or more strategic, and then I just did the exact same thing over again.
Oh,
Then I
that's good to
just,
know.
yeah, yeah, I just have sort of
Because I keep
accepted that
thinking
maybe.
when I get to the second novel, it's going to be so
Mhm.
much better. I'm going to have it all figured out.
No, the second one is much worse. I'm really sorry to tell you. My second novel was the worst
Ah,
experience of my life.
well, it came together beautifully.
Thank you.
That's
No, I've heard, I shouldn't say that. I struggled so much with the second novel. Again, because the first one is just pure pleasure and you don't have an audience,
Sure.
there's no expectation. And so many of my friends had the same experience, the second
Mhm.
novel sucks. But then many of them told me like the third one's like once you get through the second one, it's a breeze. And then I was doing an interview a couple months ago and the moderator had written, I don't know, 7 or 8 books. And I was like, so it gets easier after the second. And she was like, oh no, it just keeps getting harder. I don't
No.
know. I can't attest to that.
At some point, I want to be like, just lie to me. Just
I
tell me that it
know,
gets
I
better.
know. Every book is the greatest book to write.
Right, exactly. It's all a
Yeah.
joy.
Right, right.
Um, you mentioned like your friends, and obviously you have had your MFA and your mentors and stuff like that. But what does your greater writing community look like right now?
Um, well, it's shifting. So I moved to a new city in gosh, when was it? November. I live in Minneapolis now. And I think, I mean, both of you know this, like when you leave an MFA program, you don't, I didn't realize what I was leaving,
Yeah.
and what
Yeah.
a gift that was.
Hmm.
And I had so many professors tell me like, stay in touch with each other, find, share work with each other. And I just,
It's literally why
yeah,
we started this podcast was to stay in touch with each other.
good. I'm
Yeah.
really glad you did that.
Yeah.
I didn't do that.
Hmm.
And I've talked to a number of my friends. I'm still friends with a lot of the people I
Hmm.
went to grad school with. I just don't share work with them.
Hmm.
Just because it gets harder to do and it's a big thing to ask
Hmm.
someone to,
Yeah.
read a 500-page novel. But
Right.
many of us have talked about, I just wish I had a group of people that I could meet with once a week. I do not have that. There's a group of women writers in Minneapolis who meets every few weeks. I've only been able to join them once, but it was really nice because from what I can tell, we're all working on different things. We're at different points in our career. The only commonality is that we're all female identifying writers who are working on stuff,
Mm.
which is cool. And so I think that is a nice thing. But yeah, my writing community is my dogs who stare at me while I write, when I write, which is not very much lately.
Hmm.
But it's hard. It's a hard thing to find and it's a hard thing to foster. Right now I'm very grateful just that I have a lot of friends who I've known, for the last
Yeah.
10 years who are also writers at different phases in their career or people who studied writing who aren't writing anymore, which is also
Hmm.
fine. It's not
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
a lifelong thing. So yeah, I
Hmm.
just try to yeah.
Who's your first reader when you get something down?
My agent, I'm
That's so
pretty like
nice.
I keep it pretty close to the vest.
Hmm.
Primarily just out of courtesy, again, because I write long,
Hmm.
but my agent is she's really good at like she'll read my novel and then we'll have like a 10-minute phone call. Like she's very good at
Hmm.
sort of boiling it down to here's what's not working, here's what's working.
Hmm.
And then the further I get into a book, she'll sort of do the more micro level, like chapter 19 is boring or whatever.
Hmm.
She's nicer than that usually.
I will tell you, she gave me a very nice rejection letter, so
Oh, good.
she's nice.
She's a class act. I love her. She
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Listen, any agent that writes back a formal rejection, I'm like, you're a
Yes.
class act. You're great. Because
Yeah.
the number that just ghost me,
Yes.
so yeah.
Yes. I know. It's
Yeah.
it's
It's
such a
crazy.
fraud.
Um,
Yeah.
But I love that your agent is so involved with you because, we've heard people talk about having to switch agents and how difficult that can be sometimes. So I love yours is one of those stories that I'm like, I hope I get that someday. Like, I hope an agent who believes in me that much, you
I hope
know?
you do too. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank
No,
you.
it's really nice. I feel so lucky that like my agent and my editor and most of the people at Doubleday, if not all of them, are people that I would like want to hang out. I just feel so
Yeah.
lucky that I've found people who when they call me, I'm like happy to answer the phone. So yes, I feel very fortunate for that because yeah, I've certainly
Mhm.
heard horror stories and it's all about communication.
Yeah.
It's like dating.
I am 32, turning 33 this year.
Mhm.
You're about the same age as my older sister. So, like in my book, all of us are still very young.
Mhm.
How do you deal with that kind of pressure of like you already have two best-selling novels, you're super young, like you want to continue I guess producing at the same rate? Like, do you have a goal in mind of like, I'd love if I could publish like a book every 2 years, or is it just kind of come whenever it comes?
I would say it's more that I try to more sort of come whenever it comes. I think I am so in awe of the writers who publish a book every 2 years, who
Oh
publish a
my
book
gosh.
once a
Yeah.
year. Yeah,
Yeah.
those people are bionic, and I'm very proud of them. But I am not one of them. And I think, Most Fun came out, and I actually had a draft of the book that
Hmm.
became Same as It Ever Was. So I was like, great, I'm gonna, knock this out. And then it just wasn't working as a book, and it took me much longer to put it back together and sort of rewrite it than I thought it was going to. And I reached a point where I just had to say, that's okay. This isn't an
Yeah.
industry where there are sort of benchmarks you need to meet. I mean,
Hmm.
internal benchmarks perhaps, but I
Yeah.
Right.
I think I've also been aware just in the last few years of how life gets in the way. And
Yeah.
it does with a 9 to 5 job too, but I think with writing, like I'm very fortunate to be in a place in my life right now where I am writing full time as my job. But that also means that when personal things come up, I am a likelier person to be tagged than someone who has a 9 to 5 job because I have the
Right.
flexibility. So it's a
Right.
blessing and a curse. But I think as things arise in my personal life, I just sort of take it as I'm not always as graceful about this as I'm making it sound, but I try to take it as, I'm lucky that I'm able to deal with this
Hmm.
instead of writing or
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't I try not to it's challenging because it's a creative pursuit, but you also have to pay your bills. I
Right.
try to be smart with my money and sort of I
Hmm.
like to have a at least sort of 2 year idea of
Right.
what I can
Hmm.
feasibly do and whether I need to pick up outside work or not or and that's going to look different for every writer. But I try to do that so I'm never in a position where I'm like, well, I need to sell a book because,
Right.
Right. Because that's, I mean, part of, it would be such an amazing honor, I guess is the best word I can find, like to publish in your 30s and to do that. But then I feel like there's that pressure of like, okay, you publish pretty young, so let's churn those books out. Like, let's strike while the iron's hot, blah, blah, blah. So
Mhm.
it's nice to know that like the team behind you isn't pushing you of like, you got to produce, you got to keep going kind of thing.
Yeah, I think, my agent is always curious what I'm working on, but
Hmm.
if there is ever a time that she's tightening the screws, it's because I've asked her to. It's because I've
Yeah.
said,
Hmm.
I'm working on this. I need a deadline to send it to you. Like, please email me in April
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
say something
That's really
cool to me,
nice.
which she will not do. But I also think like there's writers like Elizabeth Strout, who had
Hmm.
published prior to her 50s, but didn't hit her
Yeah.
stride. And that I think is incredible. And so I think
Right.
we exist in a time where, like, I feel like the 30 under 30 or those lists where it's like
Yeah.
this wonderkin. And I just find that really boring. Like,
Okay.
I'm a lot more interested in older people than I am
Hmm.
in younger people. I
Yeah.
think both are important, but I think it's so much cooler to me if you publish your first novel at 62, than if you
Yeah.
do it at 24.
Yeah.
And so I feel like maybe we're entering a space where the zeitgeist is kind of recognizing that,
Hmm.
age is just a number and we all have like shit we need to deal with. And sometimes that
Right.
means
Yeah.
you aren't writing or you aren't.
Hmm.
So I think I try not to feel that pressure. I know it's really hard. I know that, and it's also easy for me to say because I published my first book in my 20s, but how old was I? I guess I don't remember. In my 20s. Which has its downsides too, because I didn't know who I was. And it's
Right.
Yeah.
so I think I try not to focus on that, even though it's really
Hmm.
hard.
Yeah. Because there's that ticking time clock of like, okay, like I'm already this old and like I really got to nail it down and like try and publish and blah blah blah. So, but you're right, it's arbitrary. It's self-pressure at that point.
And I feel like the older you get too, the more life you've lived and the more
Hmm.
books you've read and the more people you've
Hmm.
experienced and um that only makes you a better writer
Right.
if
Fiction
you
fodder.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. That's what I tell when I used to teach undergrads, they were always so eager to like, do you think I can apply to an MFA program now? And I would just be like, no, go work in a restaurant or like go
Hmm.
do something else for a couple of years. Don't go to an MFA when you're 22 because I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but
Of course.
I think
Right.
there's also nothing wrong with going to an MFA. I had friends in my MFA who were in
Hmm.
their 50s, and I
Yeah.
loved
Yeah.
that because it was like you raised a family or you have
Hmm.
a PhD in a different field, and that's so much more interesting to me than people who have only ever studied creative writing and talked about
Yeah.
creative writing. So,
Hmm. Definitely. We went to a low residency MFA, and so there were a lot of
oh,
people
cool.
who worked full time, who had families, who all that kind of stuff. So that was nice getting to be among that crowd.
Yeah. Where did you guys go? I should have asked you that earlier.
The program doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
I know, yeah. Not because it lost accreditation or anything. It
Oh,
just it couldn't get people to apply for it. Basically, it wasn't
okay.
advertised well enough. So,
Okay. Okay.
yeah. Yeah, so it ran for what, like 10, 12 years or something.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but Maddie was actually you were the last class to
I
graduate,
wasn't the
right?
last class. There
Oh,
was
okay.
the one right behind me. So second
Oh,
to
okay.
last.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we're very close to the end. But
Yeah, so it's even harder now because like when we're trying to find that writing community, we can't even go back to that place
Yeah.
to kind of get that advice. So that's why we did the podcast because we're like we want to build our community and meet other writers and get some advice and you
Yeah.
know.
I think that's great. Yeah.
we always have our final question, and for some reason Abigail always gives it to me. Maybe it's because she always
Okay.
asks all the questions.
Because I ask,
Okay.
here's the deal. I talk too much and I know I talk too much. So I always like to try to give you space.
If a writer was taking one piece of advice away from this interview with you, what would you want them to take away?
Oh Lord. As an ambulance goes by, I would say be gentle to yourself and be kind to yourself. That sounds a little sort of Pollyanna, but I think one thing that I have learned, and this relates to what we were just talking about, sort of putting pressure on yourself because of your age or because of, wherever you're at in your career. But I think that writing is something that you can't force, and that you shouldn't be doing unless you feel it, which you don't always. I haven't felt like writing for the last year, and I've been pretty hard on myself about that, but I've also been fortunate to have friends who have said, that's okay. Like, it's okay to
Mhm.
not do that. So I
Mhm.
think, be gentle with yourself. And I think I say this to my students all the time. It doesn't always need to be about the next thing. Sometimes it's okay to just be writing. It doesn't have to be writing towards something or writing because you want to get something or writing to pay your bills. If it's something that you care about and you're making space for it in your life in a way that makes sense and is doable for you, that's enough.
Mhm.
And so that would be my advice, I think, that I don't always follow myself, but I think the lines blur when a creative pursuit that you ideally find pleasure in is also
Hmm.
your job or the thing that you're trying to have be your job, because we exist in a society that commodifies everything, and
Yeah.
that makes it hard to enjoy anything. But I think I always just try to remind myself of, the first year that I was working on my first book and just how much joy I found in that process. And so try to have fun and be nice to
Hmm.
yourself. I don't know, your fairy
No, that's
godmother.
Yeah, I really love that though because because we talked about it, you spoke about it multiple times. Is like sometimes you don't feel like writing, sometimes you don't feel like
Yeah.
reading, and you have to take kind of these sabbaticals and breaks a little bit from writing,
Yeah.
but you still keep coming back because you're dedicated to this craft, and I think that's really what matters. And it's okay to just be like, this is not a writing season for me. I need to
Yeah.
step
hmm
back, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're not a writer anymore.
Right.
hmm
You need some time to like, I don't know,
Yes.
maybe refill your creative cup or something. Because I really feel
Mhm.
like, because there was like a year when I couldn't write and I felt like
Yeah.
I'd given up, but it wasn't that. I just needed some time before I could go back and write. So I love
Yeah.
that.
hmm
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think the people who say they write every day from 9 to 4 are lying.
hmm Yes.
That's
So
what
I
I
think,
think.
yeah.
Yes.
So I
And
try
that
to,
they also have somebody else in their life that's taking care of like all the
yes.
daily shit.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like
Yeah.
someone else is paying the bills, someone else is cleaning your
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I
house.
don't think I've ever heard a woman say she writes every
I know.
single day.
Yeah, yeah.
Nope.
Crazy how
Yeah.
that works.
Weird.
Surprising. Oh my gosh. Well, Claire, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Someday when I get published, I'll be reaching out for a blurb.
Please,
Yeah.
please, you have my email.
I'm Abigail.
And I'm Maddie, and this has been
Two writers.
Many Wrongs.